My name is Matt Daly. I'm the editor for Politico Pro's Energy service, and I'm joined here today by Senator Hickenlooper. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Matt. Glad to be here.
Not that you've got much going on up the hill here, but we'll take a little bit of your time and we'll get you back to work here. So, first of all, I wanted to ask you, the big story going around Washington, of course, is the Elon Musk Doge actions. The federal workforce is pretty traumatized right now by every count that we're hearing. What's your take on how this activity is affecting the federal government?
From an energy perspective, of just personal energy? No, I'm
well,
just
we
kidding.
can go broad and then come back to energy if you want to bring it.
Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. You know, when I first got into politics, I had a bunch of restaurants in Denver. I was frustrated by the city council and the mayor making decisions to get reelected. So I ran for mayor on this small business platform of we could make government smaller and more efficient without traumatizing it. And so I didn't really want to win in the beginning, but I ended up mayor of Denver in 2003, and we went about trying to find every way we could to make the city government smaller and to do more for the people. We didn't have layoffs. This was after the dot-com bubble had burst, so that our sales tax was way down. So we just did a hiring freeze for a couple of years and re-examined each agency. We spent a huge amount of time maintaining morale, just going, me, the mayor, you know, senior staff going into the different parts of the city government and making sure as people dealt with, you know, for about a year we had every other Friday you'd get off at noon, but it would be unpaid, which if you're having trouble making your monthly rent at the end of the month, that's not good. But we told people how important it was their work. And we were able to, you know, over my 8 years as mayor, we didn't make it smaller, but we dramatically restrained the growth of the city government, and we did all these new programs. I think that's what people want. They want us, we all knew the government should be smaller. Just like any business, if it's unrestrained, bureaucracy will naturally grow. That's a natural tendency. But coming in and I think just helter-skelter using an axe on people's lives is traumatic for everyone. Even the people that haven't been dismissed feel the pain and the trauma around there, and it doesn't appear that there's enough effort going in trying to make sure that people understand that civil service is an honor. I mean, we spent a lot of time making sure people understood that they were delivering something that people needed.
That appears to really, I mean, the traumatization appears to be not a bug, but a feature of this operation. The head of the OMB has said, you know, that was really a goal, to make it unpleasant for this work.
Right, yeah, well, I understand that. They want chaos, and they want that you know, flooding the zone. They want so much going on so fast, and a lot of that, some form of emotional chaos, terror almost. And again, there's two different ways of doing things, and that wouldn't be the one that I've seen to be most effective. I think it's better to work within that bureaucracy and get everybody on the same page saying money matters. You know, I was raised by a single mom who was grew up in the Depression. She never bought a dress. She sewed everything. She'd wash tin foil and saran wrap and tape it to the refrigerator door. That frugality is the absence of that frugality is what pisses people off in terms of their relationship with government. They think that it's being wasted, and that drives anybody nuts, and rightfully so.
When you look across what the longer-term effects are in your own state, which has a lot of federal land and federal operations, is there anything there that are you seeing any effects now from what's happened here in Washington, or are there aspects that you're worried about may be affected?
Oh, no, this is, you know, my mother, again, she was widowed twice before she turned 40, and I was the youngest of 4 kids, and as often happens, kids will have different versions of what happened. At a certain point, she'd say, all right, no nonsense, and get just what we've actually experienced, what we saw from each of us, no nonsense. And I think that's where we are in Colorado and around the country. It's no nonsense. They laid off a bunch of people, scientists in Fort Collins, the CDC did, that were working on vector-driven diseases, so think Lyme disease, and making real progress, and all of a sudden, it's shut down, it's stopped, they're gone. Will they get hired back? There's talk, I mean, who knows? But those interruptions of the hard work of scientific, exploration is really what they're doing. They're trying to find a solution for a disease that's been, hurting people for years. We have a large federal government component of the IRS in Colorado, and hundreds of people lost their jobs. That affects everyone around them. You wonder how we're going to collect all the rent owed to the United States, all of our tax revenues. I can go down the list one after another of places where we have examples in Colorado of places where government is now not delivering. I mean service to veterans. So many of the layoffs are the last people hired are the first to get laid off. Well, there's been an emphasis for 7 or 8 years to hire veterans. When they come out, the people that risk their lives defending our country, shouldn't they get the first federal jobs? Well, suddenly we're laying off, hundreds and hundreds, thousands of veterans. That's, I don't think, what Americans want.
In your committee's purview, you've got the Energy Department, which is now run by your friend, Chris Wright, the Energy Secretary, who you introduced to his confirmation hearing. Are you concerned about what the DOGE cuts might do at the Energy Department? We saw a little bit of a stutter step with a pretty big area of the Energy Department.
Nuclear safety?
That's one, yeah.
Yeah, you really, when you're going to do mass layoffs, you're going to be better served to have more time. And that was not Chris Wright's fault. That happened very rapidly, even as he was, I think, before and as he was being confirmed. But you don't want to, when you have massive layoffs, you want to make sure you're not laying off the people that are doing the essential work. I flew back from Denver to DC last Tuesday, a week ago, and was on the plane with a guy who'd worked for the Department of Agriculture for 34 years. And he was the one who told me that he just laid off 21 people, and 4 or 5 of them were working in the Ames laboratory in Ames, Iowa, on avian flu. And they're the ones who are doing all the assessments and looking at all the different strains, and is it getting into cattle, is it getting into people? That is real time, has the potential to be a real pandemic. And suddenly we stopped all our work on it. That stuff is frustrating at every level, but those critical things like avian flu, nuclear safety, when we laid off all those people that were in charge of our nuclear safety program, no nonsense, that's a problem.
Absolutely. When you look at the way that shifting over more to the Hill activity now, the Republicans are engaged in setting their budget priorities now, and then they'll be moving on to reconciliation, the big beautiful bill, or perhaps two. We'll see what the day brings us. But this was a real landmark achievement for Democrats under Joe Biden. The Inflation Reduction Act and elements of the bipartisan infrastructure law as well. What can Democrats do to influence or to hold back on Republican efforts to undermine that spending?
Well, I think to a certain extent, as we get more transparency and make people all across the country understanding what those cuts are going to mean to them. It's a little known fact, or it's known, but it's not widely recognized, that 65 or 70% of the Inflation Reduction Act investments in renewable energies and tax incentives happen in red states. This freezing of wind permits, onshore and offshore, most of those wind permits are onshore are in rural counties all across America. For farmers and for the county governments, those revenues are like a miracle. In many cases, especially where water's been an issue and the agriculture is not doing as well as it used to, we have parts of Colorado like that, the revenues from wind energy are a godsend. Well, the notion that we're in an emergency, that we are now in an energy emergency and we've got to do all these, cut back everything and stop doing this and that. The last 2 years we have produced global records of oil and gas. We are the largest oil and gas producer in the history of the world. And if you look at all of our energy, we're not as large as China, but we're only 1/3 of the population. Right. So on a scale, we are by far the largest producer of energy in the history of the world on a per capita level. Those things, freezing so much of the Inflation Reduction Act, it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face, is what the old saying was, that you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And really, I think in many of these red counties, as people find out what that's going to mean to their county, their neighbors, they're going to push back and say, hey, wait, let's rethink this. These investments actually benefit us.
And we were seeing some footage from a lot of members were home over the weekend. They had town halls. Voters seemed to be a little distressed about the DOGE cuts that are going on and some of the things that are happening in Washington right now, a lot of these investments, be it manufacturing or be it clean energy installations themselves, may be a little bit below the radar. Even former President Biden has said maybe they didn't do as good a job as publicizing this rollout as they could have. Do you think that those investments are going to, people are going to start to see them or notice when they're gone? Will there be a groundswell to support those and to get back to those Republican members about that impact?
I think there's going to be a groundswell that's going to connect many of these cuts. And I think the energy-related ones are going to be a big part of that, especially in rural areas, but really all across the country. But it's going to be coupled with the cuts in veterans programs, in housing, in the nutrition, the food nutrition, the SNAP programs. You look, I mean, if these cuts continue and suddenly farmers aren't going to be able to get crop insurance, right, for their crops, that's going to cripple small farmers way more than the big guys. It's going to cripple them and make them vulnerable to one bad year and they're out of business and they lose their farm. And I guarantee you that will get connected to all these other cuts, and there will be a lot of people showing up at their Republican House member saying, how can you support this? Why are we going along with this? Let's get realistic. Let's cut the nonsense and look at, what do we really want to cut? What are our real benefits? And what are the things that are, that make a good story in the newspaper but aren't really helping each individual community? These people are going to protest. They're going to say, my community.
As the dynamics have changed in the new Congress, you've really tried to carve out a role as a moderate deal maker, much like your friend Joe Manchin did in the previous Senate. Where are some areas that you think you and your Republican colleagues can find agreement and get legislation moving?
Sure, and when I first got into politics back in 22 years ago, as a mayor and then as a governor, what attracted me was the opportunity to get stuff done, to not get so involved in the politics and really look at what's the compromise, what's the alignment of self-interest so that we can get to the compromise and move forward and improve things for our common future. And Joe Manchin was, I think, very successful at hearing both sides. And I try to be more of a listener than a talker. I've never persuaded anybody to change their mind about something that mattered to them by telling them why I'm right or why they're wrong. Really, it's some of the lessons you learn in the restaurant business is when someone's really upset, you repeat back to them their same words. Some people have told me that's like marital therapy. But you say, yo, that soup was dropped right on your lap. And it was very hot. I mean, repeating back people's words, listening to them, making them feel heard is a very real way to go and find common ground, Republicans and Democrats. And in answer to your question, I think permitting reform, I think we right now recognize we don't have the grid to move electricity from where we can make it to where we need it. And it's going to take time. The notion that we're going to have to spend 7 to 11 years every time we want to build a transmission line, that's too long. And whether you're an environmentalist or whether you're from a large utility or whether you're from the energy industry, any part of it, all of us have an alignment of self-interest to accelerate that and make sure, again, we are the most environmentally sensitive, or one of the most environmentally sensitive countries on Earth. And our standards for both the extraction of minerals but also the processing minerals are going to be the cleanest and set national or international standards. So whether it's building out the grid or finding ways to look at some of the critical minerals, again, if you really want to address climate change, we need to get those minerals, and it's not just the rare earth minerals like lithium, but it's things like copper and nickel. We're going to have to look at mines all over the world, and we're going to have to recognize that we're going to have to raise the standards by which those minerals are extracted and processed, try to do more of that in this country or with our allies, and making sure that we maintain those relationships with our allies so that we can have a level of trust that we'll get those minerals when we need them. But that's how we're going to address climate change in real time, at the same time keeping energy costs as low as possible. Again, one of the things Chris Wright talks about all the time is that there's 1 billion of us that have this abundance of inexpensive energy, but there's 7 billion people out there that would like to have that, and 2 billion don't have anything at all. They're burning open hearth stoves to cook their food and to heat their housing. And the number, the World Health Organization says that there's roughly 2 million people a year that die directly from the pulmonary diseases that come from those open hearth burning. And that should be unacceptable to all of us. So we need to look at, as we transition to a cleaner energy future, and that's going to include who knows what, whether that's just wind and solar and geothermal and hydropower, or whether that's going to include some sort of carbon capture or nuclear. We have to recognize that we need more energy. The rest of the world needs energy as well. And we've got to have all of the above and continue to push the research, but also use the incentives to scale the production, and whether it's grid or whether it's getting these critical minerals out. All these things should be bipartisan. So anyway, that's the critical minerals, the grid, getting a business plan. Republicans and Democrats, we should all want to have a North Star. Here's where we're going. Here's what it's going to cost, and here are the variations, and we know we don't have all the facts, but we should be able to get to something like that on a bipartisan level.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here a little bit. You may be able to overcome that hurdle. That's a big if there with the Republicans, and come up with a permitting deal or critical minerals deal.
I think we're closer than you think. But anyway, go ahead.
Great. Well, we'll be talking to you
I'm
later
sure you
about
will
that
be.
as well. But when you look at the idea that you may pass something, you may get something passed with your colleagues on the Hill, but the administration itself seems to be both. It seems to send such mixed signals, and its willingness to really not follow the law in many cases, not follow court rulings, has to raise some questions about what is Congress doing to really implement its will as the branch of government over an executive that's seeking a lot more power to do really what it wants to do.
Well, I think Congress is and has to obey the laws and make sure that the executive branch of government obeys the laws. And the power of the purse is the most obvious place. Congress in the Constitution is designated as the sole source of actually where revenues come from and how they're to be spent. And at times the White House appears to disregard that. Congress is going to, I don't know how many thousands of lawyers are working right now in Washington, but it's a lot. And just for the record, I'm not a lawyer. 14 restaurants, I never sued anyone or got sued. We do have to have that legal remedy and make sure that the law is followed, and I think Congress will continue to do that. But I believe that I take the Trump administration at face value that they want economic growth. It's obviously slowed down a little bit right now, and they're going to be looking, I think, at ways that they can stimulate growth, and one way is through the alignment of some of these compromises, and how do you get the grid rebuilt and expanded in a way that's going to meet the transmission needs that we're going to have, and how do we make sure that we get the minerals we're going to need, and that we can do some of that extraction and processing in this country and set standards for the rest of the world, while at the same time maintaining our reputation as an environmental leader among the world's countries. So those kinds of things are going to serve, I think, what the administration wants to do. So whereas they sometimes are unpredictable, I think that's fair to say, in many situations, I think around some of these bipartisan approaches to our energy system, I'm hopeful that we won't have any surprises.
When you look at permitting specifically, at the end of last year, it seemed like you were pretty close. The handful of members, the half a dozen or maybe a dozen members who are participating in those talks, seemed really close. It seemed like everyone was sort of on the same page, but you really couldn't get the Republican leadership in the House to throw its weight behind it. Do you get a sense that that's changed now? That the Republican leadership in the House seems to have plenty on its plate right now.
Yeah, well, they do have plenty on their plate, there's no question. And I think in the next couple of weeks, we're probably not going to get a lot of progress on things like permit reform. Mm-hmm. But you're right, we were very close. And those final drafts had elements that made me and most Democrats unhappy and awkward, and they weren't perfect. But in good legislation, my experience is as long as everybody's a little bit pissed off,
Right.
you're making progress. And I think that's where we were. We were very close. And I think the places where we had contention are resolvable. It's going to take time and some conversation both in the Senate and the House. But it's so close, and it has so much material benefit to people's home districts, but also to the country. And that gives me, again, I feel pretty optimistic. Sometimes when there's this much chaos, it's hard to get optimistic. But if you're not optimistic, you're never going to get what needs to be done. And I keep telling people back in Colorado, when they get, let's just say not depressed, but they get dismayed, disheartened, disenchanted by all the chaos in Washington. This is not the time to back away and throw up your hands. This is the time to redouble your efforts and say, all right, I'm going to get involved. And I'm going to point out that we need these compromises, and we need to work on some of these things in a bipartisan way.
Do you think that the Republicans are going to bend a little bit towards Democratic requests on the grid to make a stronger national grid, to increase those interconnections between states and regions?
I'd be a pretty poor Joe Manchin if I was going to say the Republicans are going to bend to our way. No, I think we need to bend, and they need to bend. We all need to work towards a common goal, and I don't see us, getting them to make any compromises without us making compromises as well. It's got to be a two-headed effort to make sure that we do things in a way that really can be bipartisan. I mean, each congressperson has got to go back to their district in all this chaos and explain each specific vote. I mean, this is going to be a real period of transparency, and I think this is the kind of vote that people can go home to their districts and say, well, this is a tough vote, and here's the parts of it you're not going to like, and here's the parts of it you are going to like, but we are moving the ball down the field.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much for your joining us here today. That's all the time we have. Thank you, Senator, for your time and insight, and for our audience for coming out today to listen to our conversation. The final program in our first 100 Days Policy Breakfast Series will be a deep dive into the future of agriculture policy next month. Make sure to join us for more riveting conversations with some of the nation's key agricultural policy leaders on March 13th. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.